He didn't yell, he didn't strike, but 317 soldiers saw the moment he lost before she even moved. Redstone Forge was the kind of base where tradition clung to the air like gunpowder, unmistakable, stubborn, and impossible to wash off. It was known for turning out hardened warfighters, steel-spined commanders, and ghosts who never quite left the field even when the war was over. It was the kind of place where orders weren't questioned, and power flowed downward like a steel chain. But then Captain Mara Kincaid showed up, and something in that chain began to rattle. She wasn't the tallest officer, didn't speak loud, didn't shine in rank or medals, but she had something else, presence. The kind that made even seasoned NCOs straighten their backs when she entered a room. Not from fear, but from respect. She didn't need to posture. She led with clarity, precision, and something harder to name. Maybe it was her eyes, sharp, but tired. Not from lack of sleep, but from experience. She was 32, a combat leader. 1 tour in Syria, 2 in Kandahar, a Purple Heart she never mentioned, and more lives saved than she could count. She never bragged, never reminded people what she'd seen. That wasn't her. The daughter of a Marine drill instructor and a teacher who made her memorize Marcus Aurelius before algebra. Mara grew up with 2 rules: do the job or don't wear the boots, and speak with steel, never volume. She joined the army not for legacy, but to earn something no one could hand her. She trained harder than anyone, stayed later, learned every doctrine, not just tactics and theory, but how command worked and where the shadows fell. By the time she arrived at Redstone Forge, she'd already earned quiet admiration from those who valued competence over charisma. But admiration didn't protect her from what was coming, because Colonel Everett Rourke had run Redstone like a private empire for 6 years. Decorated, connected, feared. He called it command presence. Others just called it bullying. In his 50s, ice in his voice, polished boots that never saw dirt, and eyes that didn't blink, just measured. When Mara met him at officer orientation, he barely looked up. Another soft promotion. He muttered, just loud enough for her to hear. She didn't flinch, didn't reply. She just held his stare, a second too long. And just like that, the war started. Not with orders, not with shouting, but with precision strikes, briefings where he cut her off mid-sentence, training memos she'd write only for him to reissue them under his name. Red pen over every page. Overthinking, stick to basics. It wasn't critique, it was erosion. And Mara, she didn't push back, not yet. Because in places like Redstone, you don't fight early, you fight right. During that week's officer briefing, the tension finally breached the surface. Captain Mara Kincaid delivered her usual sit-rep crisp, precise. Every word backed by intel. She highlighted 3 inconsistencies in a supply drop near the southern perimeter. Nothing dramatic, just facts. Colonel Everett Rourke didn't even let her finish. A lazy wave of the hand. A sigh that sliced deeper than any insult. We'll stick to the standard process. I'm not here for micromanagement from junior officers. The silence that followed deafening. She wasn't a junior officer. She was a captain, and in the command chain. She was next in line if anything ever happened to him. The comment wasn't ignorance. It was a warning shot. Mara didn't react. Not outwardly. She nodded once and sat down. Across the room, officers shifted in their seats. Some looking away, others looking straight at her, then quickly back to their notes. No one spoke. Later, in the mess hall, she passed a table of lieutenants. One whispered to the other, "He's gunning for her." "Watch your back, Kincaid." She didn't flinch. She filed it away like a mission briefing target escalating. "Maintain posture. Do not retreat." 2 days later, it came. A surprise endurance trial, full gear. Unannounced. Run, carry, react. All under a sun that didn't forgive. Only her unit was called up. Rourke didn't even bother hiding it. He wanted them cracked, humiliated. He wanted her failure public, on tape, undeniable. But he made one mistake. He underestimated the people behind her. Because Mara didn't demand respect, she earned it. She trained with them, bled with them, never issued an order she wouldn't follow herself. That afternoon, her team stood at the line, Kevlar heavy, sweat-stinging eyes. She walked up helmet clipped, rifle slung, a 19-year-old private, barely grown into the uniform, turned to her. "You don't have to do this with us, ma'am." Mara looked at him steady, even, and said, "If they want to see me break, they'll have to watch me run first." They didn't just finish the circuit. They won it. Every single one of them. From the tower above. Rourke watched with clenched lips and a clipboard he looked ready to snap in half. That night, Mara found a note slid into her locker. No name, just 5 words. "He's losing face. Be ready. By the end of the week." Rourke shifted tactics. No more public strikes. Now it was paper cuts in the dark. Supply delays, canceled drills, denied promotions. And worst of all, he began bypassing her entirely, giving orders straight to her troops, to outsiders. It looked like paperwork noise, but Mara knew better. These were precision strikes aimed not at her rank, but at her authority. One evening, while reviewing reports in the motor pool, Staff Sergeant Holt McCready approached. Big man, quiet voice. 15 years in, we see what he's doing. "Ma'am, we talk." "We're behind you." She nodded, voice steady. "That's not always enough." He paused, then said, "He's not poking the bear anymore. He's winding up." She nodded again. "Then let's be ready when he swings." And 3 days later, he did. During a live fire maneuver in front of 317 soldiers, Mara issued a correction, a simple field reposition, completely standard, but from the sideline. Rourke's voice cracked across the field like thunder. "Captain Kincaid, who gave you the authority to override my formation?" She turned. "Calm, sir. I observed a vulnerability on the left flank and took initiative per protocol. That's not your call to make," he roared. Marching toward her, soldiers froze, eyebrows raised. The air changed, and then he stepped into her space, closer than regulation allowed. Breath on her face, hand rising, not fast, not yet striking, but rising. His hand wasn't down yet, but it was up, unmistakably raised, and on a military field, in front of 317 soldiers. That gesture meant everything. It was a threat, a warning, a declaration of power. But more than that, it was a mistake. Because Captain Mara Kincaid had spent her entire career learning to recognize danger. Not just the kind that wears a uniform, but the kind that hides behind one. She didn't move. Not yet. Because she wanted every soldier present to see it for what it was. This wasn't escalation. She hadn't raised anything. He had. Colonel Rourke leaned in, his lip curling into a sneer. "You think you can embarrass me in front of my men? Captain, they're not your men," she thought, aloud. Her voice was steady. "I followed field protocol. Sir, you taught it yourself last month. That should have ended it. But Rourke didn't want truth. He wanted obedience. He wanted fear. And Mara had none left to give. "I'll teach you something else right now," he hissed. And then he struck. Not a slap. A flat-palmed blow aimed with purpose. The kind meant not just to sting, but to brand. But his hand never landed. The moment his shoulder twitched forward, her training took over, and everything slowed down. Years of Krav Maga, close quarters combat, live capture drills. Every lesson burned into reflex. Her left hand shot up, caught his wrist mid-air, pivot, leverage, step through, crack. The sound echoed across the drill field like a live round. 317 soldiers flinched, some in shock, others by instinct. Rourke dropped to one knee, his mouth frozen open, a sharp breath stuck in his chest. His right arm dangled bent in a way that arms should never bend. Mara released him immediately. No rage, no heavy breath, just control, coiled and exact. She stood over him, her voice even, cold. "You will never raise your hand to me again." "Colonel." Gasps rippled through the ranks. No one moved, no one dared. From the edges of the yard, a medic sprinted forward, already calling for backup. Rourke didn't speak. Couldn't. Maybe. His face had gone pale, his eyes wide, stunned by the pain, but more than that, by the loss of control. Mara turned, slow, deliberate. She scanned the formation, meeting the eyes of soldier after soldier, and when she spoke, her voice carried. Formation remains intact. They obeyed, not because of rank, but because something had shifted in that moment. Respect wasn't commanded. It had been earned and etched into the dirt beneath their boots. Up in the tower, Major Glossman and a handful of junior officers stood slack-jawed. No one had expected this. They had long suspected Rourke's behavior might explode one day, but none had imagined she would be the one to detonate the silence. Within minutes, the drill was called off. Troops dismissed, though few moved quickly. The base had shifted. Whispers spread like wildfire, faster than any radio ever could. Did she really break his arm? He tried to hit her. She didn't even flinch. Back in her quarters, Mara sat at her desk, helmet off, hands clasped, still vibrating. Not from the takedown, but from the control it had taken not to do more. She hadn't wanted to hurt him, but she wouldn't be humiliated. Not in front of her soldiers. Not again. A knock. Sharp. 3 beats. Staff Sergeant McCready. His face unreadable, but eyes gleaming. "Captain," words already moving up the chain. She nodded. "I figured." He looked past her into the stillness of the room, then back to her. "You didn't lose anyone today. Ma'am, if anything, you earned more than most do in 20 years. She didn't smile. "Not yet. This won't be the end of it." She said, "No, ma'am." He replied, "It's the beginning." It had never been about rage. It had been about a line, and what happens when someone crosses it, in front of 317 witnesses, as protocol dictated. Captain Mara Kincaid was summoned to the administrative wing. The room was steel, still, and fluorescent cold. Behind the desk sat Colonel Felix Meyer, a regulation man flown in from the Pentagon Square shoulders, clipped sentences, and 0 patience for gray areas. On the screen behind him, 3 versions of the moment played on loop. Drone cam, helmet footage, surveillance tower, same motion, same result. 1 raised hand, 1 takedown. Mara stepped in. He paused the feed. "Have a seat, Captain." She did. Meyer leaned forward, tapping his pen slowly on the table. "Colonel Rourke's radius is fractured. You broke it. He claims you attacked him, publicly in full view of the battalion." She didn't blink. "He raised his hand to strike me." He nodded. "The footage confirms that. But you did use force against a superior officer. That carries weight." Her voice was level. "He attempted an assault. That carries weight too." They sat in silence for a beat, neither side blinking. Truth hung between them like a locked door, unavoidable, undeniable. "Why didn't you de-escalate?" he asked. She didn't hesitate. "I did. I stopped the strike before it landed. Minimum force, maximum control." Meyer exhaled, leaned back, and tapped the screen again. "You should prepare for a formal hearing," he said, "but something's unusual." He slid a hand toward a growing stack of printed emails. "Since the incident, I've received over 30 unsolicited statements. Short, long, anonymous, signed. All say the same thing." He met her eyes. "They say this wasn't about impulse. It was about restraint. That you didn't act out of ego, but out of principle. And if it had been anyone else standing where you were, there would have been blood." Mara looked at him, flat, focused. There almost was. He handed her a temporary suspension. No cuffs, no reprimand. Just the sound of the paper sliding across steel. Outside, soldiers stood in quiet clusters. They didn't salute, but they didn't look away either. There was no judgment, only something else: recognition and respect. Staff Sergeant McCready met her near the walkway. "They taking you off the line?" She nodded. "Until they decide if stopping an assault is still punishable." He glanced back at the field. This base needed a reckoning. You just lit the fuse. Nearby, a cluster of privates huddled under the barracks awning. One of them Private Lorne. Eyes wide, voice quiet, whispered as she passed. She didn't flinch. That night, Mara didn't eat, didn't read, didn't touch her boots. She sat on the edge of her cot, staring at her hands, not shaking, not sorry, just still. At sunrise, Redstone Forge didn't feel like Redstone Forge anymore. Orders were quieter, glances longer. Even the air was different, sharper, like it had heard something the night before. Outside her door, taped up without a name, was a rough pencil sketch. A soldier stood tall. Behind her, a shadow loomed, its hand raised. But the soldier didn't flinch, didn't look back. Above the drawing were just 5 words. Strength isn't loud, it just doesn't move. And that morning, Redstone became something else, a base full of whispers, slowly turning into voices. It wasn't the broken arm that scared them. It was the silence shattered, and what came rushing in to fill it. By morning, a new figure stepped onto Redstone Forge: Brigadier General Curtis Layden, boots polished to a mirror, face unreadable. Sent straight from Army HQ. His job contained the fallout, but the fire was already out of the box. He called a closed-door session with General Huxley and the legal counsel. The orders were sharp. Control the narrative, calm the ranks, keep Redstone out of headlines. But it was too late. Military forums were already lit. A phrase was trending on vet networks. The snap heard round the base. Anonymous sources, likely junior officers, leaked that the Army's internal probe had already uncovered 30-plus complaints against Colonel Rourke. Some recent, others shelved. A few quietly resolved with transfers. By noon, Rourke was escorted out of the base hospital. No press, no statements, just a lawyer's release, calling the incident a career assassination and blaming toxic feminism. The backlash was instant. Some whispered support in closed rooms, but others enlisted, and officers alike ripped off their rank tabs and posted them with 6 words: "Protect those who protect each other." That evening, Captain Mara Kincaid was called to General Huxley's office. Waiting there, General Layden. He didn't offer a seat, just a stare. "Captain," he said flatly, "you've made quite a name for yourself." She didn't flinch. "They say." "I didn't ask to." Mara replied. "No," Layden said, stepping closer. "But now journalists are calling. A senator wants answers. Veterans are organizing. And you've become the face of something." He leaned in. "Captains don't lead movements. They follow orders." Mara met his eyes without blinking. "Neither does covering for abusers." It hit like a charge waiting to ignite. Even Huxley flinched. But then, he spoke up. "Sir, with respect, this story is out. We either lead the conversation or get swallowed by it." Layden exhaled hard. "Fine, then we manage it." He turned back to Mara. "You're being reassigned to Westfield Command. Publicly, it's a promotion. Privately, it's a firebreak." Mara raised an eyebrow. "You're not silencing me. You're amplifying me." Layden didn't answer. He just nodded once, then walked out, boots echoing down a hall that no longer feared her steps. They tried to bury the story, but all they did was plant it.